neuroscience. So yeah, and just please feel free to shoot me an email anytime you have a question or a concern, and I'm here to be helpful for you guys.
So you had a little bit of a thing, a little snippet that you said, well, that's not enough money for it. Not so enough. So do you actually shepherd stuff through the lawmaking process?
So our legislative team does. We provide recommendations to Congress. This is how much we want for NIH. We just released those to Congress, and we want a $2 billion increase for NIH, and this is why. And
so would you do something like some agency or person's there? He doesn't know how to deal with Congress. I mean, who knows how to deal with that? So you would say something like, well, kind of like the Lil Abner thing. Like, I remember an old comic strip where the guy needed $2.95 for a battery, and he was laughed off the congressional floor. Oh, forget it. Whereas the next guy, $3.4 million for, oh, no problem. Yeah. So would you sort of shepherd them through sort of the psychology and what to ask for and all this kind of thing if they were complete novices? Or
right. Well, that goes back to, that's what we do a lot on our Hill Day. A lot of times when we go to Capitol Hill and we bring constituents with us, we tell them, we're asking for this much and this is why. We need this much to keep the lights on. We need this much to just order supplies, this much to hire staff. Sometimes the staffers need a breakdown of that information to really understand how much money is required to do experiments. And it's not a one-year thing. It takes years and years to build on each other. We're barely getting back up to where we were before sequestration. So, I mean, this progress is good, but we need to keep going, and it's that sustained progress. So we do break that down a little bit further and try to help the staffers think about the psychology of it during our meetings and our Capitol Hill days. But yeah, it's a struggle, because in the lab you're used to it. You know how much money it makes, but they don't. They're on the other side. Yeah.
So for things like, you were talking about the webinars and broadcasting to the public. So how often do you find that like the public themselves actually use products like, the webinars that you produce, as opposed to say like, federal agencies or people going onto those webinars? Like, how do you get your information accessible and make sure that the public is actually kind of know about these opportunities to listen in?
That's the hard part. So I really would like to encourage more scientists, people like you guys, to encourage other people to also watch these webinars. So far, most people that are watching these webinars are other scientists, other people that care about canines and biomedical research. The key then is after the fact. We need to keep that conversation going. So we then go to Twitter and we try to promote that. We try to use all the hashtags and get that out on the social media to make sure that it gets out to the general public. But yeah, that remains a big challenge.
Yeah, because, so part of my background is I did a fair amount of national defense work. So, whenever there'd be a webinar about, say, HHS framework guidance from 2010 about, gene sequences and, things like that, you don't really think to yourself, I should invite like my neighbor to kind of hop in on this, right? Because like who would really be interested in kind of like the kind of, the jargon like you were talking about?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a real quandary for organizations like you, where you want to make yourself accessible and increase constituent awareness, but it's such a niche. In some ways, it's so niche, and it feels so separate, and that's why I feel like spaces like BUGSS is really great, because it increases community awareness of science and how science is a part of everybody's everyday lives.
I know. The problem is just getting them through the door. If we can get more people through the door to hear about it, then I think we can get somewhere. But how to get that message out and people interested is still hard.
Well, I promise you the place would be swamped if this was marketed as a animal advocacy or animal rights thing. There would be a line going out the door. But I think people glaze over when it's
Policy.
Policy, yeah.
Or they're
So-
like, oh, I just don't want to do it. I mean, we hear about it enough in the media. I mean, politics it's just flooded our media streams. But,
Right.
you know, I think connecting science and policy is really where progress can be made. And we just need to make that more fun. I don't know how to get that message out there.
I just would suggest it be focused on an issue or two. Because
Yeah.
your organization seems like it's got a lot going on, like so many, there's,
Yeah,
there's so many
that's
avenues.
why I only focus on animals and research.
Right, exactly.
It's such a big issue. So if there's an animal problem or a bill is introduced, they turn to me and Naomi, you got to do this, 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 and this.
Yeah,
It has to work that way.
right.
I was really impressed that there's a push to reduce the IACUP requirements.
Oh, okay.
Because, you know, having worked with that, it became over the years a real nightmare. So I was wondering, is that push from the universities, or how did that effort get started?
We collaborated with the Council of Government Relations, COGR. So they represent many institutions. So yeah, we partnered with them because it's important that we, from the biomedical research standpoint and the institutions, come together as one unified voice, because there's still a lot of gap in between there. But yeah, we collaborated with them to launch this webinar series, and that was really effective. We reached over 500 viewers in those webinars, and that has surpassed any other record from FASEB. I was
That's great.
astounded how many people are interested in that topic. It's online too, so you're free to use it. And we had so many questions from that session that what I decided to do was compile all of those questions, because we didn't have time to get to all of them. And I distributed it to the different speakers, so to even NIH and USDA, and those questions are now online, so line by line, anyone that had a question is answered by those speakers. Yeah.
I'm from IMET in Baltimore,
Uh-huh.
Institute for Marine and Environmental Technology. And we have a concern, we have a leaning to make sure that the graduate students that we're training get exposed to all kinds of different career opportunities.
Yes.
And so we have opportunities for them in entrepreneurship. But also, we work a lot with an agency called Sea Grant. It's part of NOAA. And Sea Grant offers every year a few fellowships throughout the country. They're called Canal Fellowships. 50 throughout the country. And students late in their graduate education have the opportunity for a year to work in some kind of policy-making situation. It could be with a government agency
Sure.
or on the Hill or something.
Sure.
And it seems to me like there should be more of that going on, more opportunities for early scientists.
Yeah, to figure out if that's the route they want to go.
Oh no, not necessarily whether that's the route they want to know, but to have some understanding of how.
Policy?
Yes.
Yeah. I think it needs to be embedded in the curriculum. I think everyone needs to take a policy course. I was struck by how much, I didn't understand the budget, how it worked, which committee oversees NIH. It's actually different than the one that oversees NSF. No one understands that. So I think the students that are dependent on that funding need to hear about it, and I think even PIs need to hear it. They don't know. They just go through the motions. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, policy is key. It might be boring, but I mean, you can have people like me that just blabber about it, and they can try and make it fun.
I think one of the problems is it's so complex that the PIs tend to shield their students from it,
Yeah.
right? The PIs
Right.
take care of all the grant writing, and
Right.
the student never even knows about
Right.
kind of the whole process, which is somewhat unfortunate.
Yeah. I mean, my PI said, no, if you're going to see what a grant writing is, and all hours of the night we had to just compile everything. I was like, okay, I'm not doing academia. Like, that was yeah. Is this your way of like telling you to stay in lab? And, like, I'm not doing that. But it helped me understand just the struggle PIs are going through, the funding that they're fighting for. It's just crazy, and I think that's what inspired me. I mean, I had friends that got turned away from labs. Labs were shutting down, and that's what prompted me to ask my PI, why aren't we funding science? Why is this even an issue? And he said, you need to hear about some policy. And so that's how it got me started. But I think everyone needs to be exposed to it, like you said.
But also putting young scientists into those kinds of situations, I think helps them learn how to communicate their science to
Absolutely.
non-scientists. which,
Absolutely.
I don't find particularly easy myself.
No.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah. I went to my first Capitol Hill Day and I had to be trained to give an elevator speech.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you describe what your research is in just, a minute or so? Because that's, no offense, that's how long the policymakers
about
can
to say
pay
the same
attention.
thing.
Yeah. And I mean, that really helped me understand, and it made me a better presenter, a better communicator with other folks. I mean, I give seminars trying to pretend like my mom and dad are in the background, who are an economics background, have no idea with science. So I think you're right. We need to up the curriculum. Yeah.
I just want to add to that, Naomi, because Congress doesn't know how much money we need because we as scientists never communicated that. We never
Yeah.
said about our problems, like just like we were talking, like grad students. Nobody talks about mental health, depression issues. It's okay to have them, but it's not. You need to talk about it. I think as scientists we failed. We didn't tell the public what we are doing, why we are publishing. And that's how I feel like now the younger scientists are more interested in science comm, but then you have the push from the PI saying like, oh, this is not what you want to, just do the paper for your own group,
Yeah.
which is probably like 10 or 15, people in a prominent field. We are not catering to the masses, we are just catering to a particular field. And when that happens, we cannot ask or push for more money or more science, like we can't advocate for ourselves.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Arpita. I'm from Georgetown University, and I'm just trying to finish my MBA course. And my last course was on business policy, and I try to keep connecting the gaps between the science and the business. And I would like to know, where does FASEB stand in terms of stem cell research, because there are so many unregulated stem cell clinics around, and why and what kind of steps have FASEB taken so far to bring in policies and regulations? That's one thing. And just yesterday or today, we heard in the news that in terms of animal research, in China, there was recently a monkey that was injected with the human brain gene so that it becomes more clever. So such research comes up here and there. Of course, that happens in China, but then you still have unregulated stem cell clinics here as well. So what steps has the government taken? How can FASEB facilitate that regulation and policy?
Yeah. So fetal tissue and stem cell research, that's a very touchy subject. And as far as the clinics that are not regulated so far, I'm not sure what steps we have taken to address that. I know that there has been a big push from trying to ban fetal tissue research in general, and we have taken a firm stance against that because a lot of research depends on fetal stem cells, and there's this big push to make it seem like we are creating, Franken babies and CRISPR babies and things like that. But so recently, we just got approved a humanized mouse model fact sheet describing the ways in which fetal stem cells can be used to create and help other research models. So a lot of vaccine studies are dependent on fetal tissue. A lot of HIV and AIDS research is dependent on fetal stem cells. So when it comes to just how it affects the biomedical researchers and their work, FASEB will step in and we take a stand on that. As far as other clinics and whether it's federally regulated or not, I'm not so sure. I can get back to you on that though. But yeah, there's the issue with the CRISPR-Cas9 baby that happened in China, this monkey. We take a firm, because there's an ethical line, right? And NIH took a firm stance against that too, and we fall in line right behind that. So there is a line to that, and we need to use science for what it's intended for and not to cross any boundaries.
So to further that, you would say on the stem cell issue, look for an alternative as best you can, or would you just say
Absolutely, we're looking for alternatives, but the fact is those alternatives are just not there yet.
Yeah.
The science
Well,
is
there's
not
many stem cells that are not fetal stem cells.
correct.
They use pluripotent stem cells, but
Yeah.
they do have their own drawbacks too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's something very different from like iPSCs in induced pluripotent stem cells. You can use those for all kinds of experiments, and that's been a tremendous breakthrough in the field. But you still cannot program an iPSC cell back to the fetal stage. The science is just not there yet. So the fetal stem cell has attributes and characteristics that you just can't get with those other ones. So there are certain experiments that cannot be done without fetal stem cells. And that's the kind of conversation we need to be having. We went to HHS and we had that conversation with them. He said, why can't you use this over this? I said, well, for cancer, the fetal stem cell has certain attributes that you can't reprogram an adult stem cell from. So that's the only resource. But as we mentioned with animals, when you put in a protocol, when you put in a grant application and you want to say I have to use fetal stem cells, you have to give a justification for why. You have to do the literature search and explain why there is no other research that can be done without this. Just like there's no other research that can be done without using a dog. So yeah, it's not like scientists want to be taking those sources and it's because, oh, that's all we know. No, it's because that's where the science is at this time. We want to one day get away from animals, but we're just not there yet.
So just to follow up on that conversation, is not just about the science per se, but also application of what we are going to use the iPSC. If the end product is finding a drug or discovery, the FDA is still trying to find out regulations on how to test a drug on iPSC cell lines. Industry people are not using iPSC because they don't know how to validate the protocol to get the drug out to the market. For them, the end result is like getting an FDA approval, and when you don't have the regulations and guidances, how are you going to use this product for application? So that's the other side of the story too.
Yeah. So how active can you be? It seems like there's a lot of voicing the concerns with collective parties. How active can you be in at all? So can you just say, we don't agree with limitations on that for these reasons? Like, can you go a step further and say, hey, animal rights people, how about you get together with us and we advocate for more research on different tools that would prevent us from using animals, so some of these new technologies, or saying, hey, FDA, can we work with you to help move those along? Or you kind of just you gotta draw a line and that's pretty much it.
Well, no, if we can find common ground with other parties, then absolutely, and because there's strength in numbers, and we should get behind one position.
It's definitely, I think what Lindsay's saying is perfectly right, because there are so many labs that I have seen myself where you can replace the animal studies with iPSC, and some of the studies that require the embryonic stem cells, they can probably use the animal models. So there should be some kind of a policy that demarcates both, and the grants are allowed or they're being given funds to do the research where it is required for either the animal research or for when there is availability for other technology to use, they probably should adopt some of these iPSC and the other technologies that's already available.
And that's the reason why it goes through this peer review process.
Yes, that's true, but nonetheless, there are several labs that have been using animal models, which you don't have to at this time for drug development, and iPSC would be a great technology to use.
Not in all cases though, because a lot of times you have to test the behavioral aspects of it, and that can only be done back in an animal model. So you can't really replicate a disease stage only in a dish. You would have to replicate that back in where there's blood flowing, if that makes sense. So there are these tests, and a lot of the FDA requires that it be tested in an animal before it goes to clinical trials.
And again, so if that happens, so is it possible again to regulate that you don't have to go into larger animals as opposed to just using the mouse model, which can be demonstrated?
So that's the big debate, and a lot of times you cannot replicate everything in a mouse as you can back to a human. So for example, the neural circuitry of the mouse is not exactly matched up with humans, but the dog actually is. And it's also worth emphasizing that a lot of these studies that are done with dogs or cats or non-human primates, they actually benefit the animals too in the long run. When they go to the veterinarian and they get a drug, that actually helps them, and that came from that research. So a lot of the physiology, the size, is more similar to humans for certain disease models than it is for the rat and mouse. But I do want to stress that 99% of all research is done in rodents, rats and mice, and less than 0.5% is done in dogs. It's very little.
Sorry, 99% of all what research?
All animal research.
Yeah.
Research.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna switch the question to an economic question.
Okay.
And so historically the U.S. has invested a lot in terms of basic research. A lot of federally funded research was from obviously federally funded. So in the 60 to 70% range. And I think in science of 2018, I think the values have dropped to about 42%. Federal, of basic research is funded by the federal government. Have you found, or has your organization found, as the landscape has been changing with less federal funding being provided and more private investors or industry, have you been finding your work and your communication strategies changing?
There's a lot of, there's this big push now that, research can be done more in the private sector. They can only do a portion of it. It all goes back to basic science too, and that's where federally funded research becomes important, because basic research serves as that foundation for the private groups to then come in and use it to create a drug, to create a new therapy. So we try to bridge that gap and make sure that people understand that basic science research is irreplaceable, and the federal government also benefits from it because there's a return of investment when you invest in basic science.
Right, but I mean, this is saying then that, for like in 2018, 42% of basic research was funded by the federal government, and 58% of basic research was funded by private institutions and organizations. So,
By basic research, you mean non-translational?
So I just vaguely remember the term basic research as in kind of foundational research. That's kind of the way that I interpreted it, not applied.
Goal-oriented, not applied.
Yeah, so not necessarily applied. So that was my understanding of that particular article.
Okay.
Maybe I need to go back to it,
Yeah,
but
I'd be interested to read that.
Just to kind of put it, I think the way I interpret what you're saying, this is a little bit of a medical background, but I believe it was the 60s or so, there was a push for funding into the war on cancer. And at this time, the government put their money towards drugs that would just sort of kill cancer. It wasn't until the year 2000 where the basic science was done, and the hallmarks of cancer are known as the year 2000. So I guess what I'm trying to say is typically when you get after sort of private interests, it takes away from these basic science concepts that I see the federal government having more of a vested interest in funding. So, there's a role for private groups, but they sort of tend to fund things that benefit them, that they have a goal for.
Yeah.
But the government, looks for something that's good for society and
Right.
for
And we need to
But
remember.
just as a correction, I mean, in the 60s and 70s, there's more of an emphasis on basic research. You had a lot more latitude to do whatever you had to go.
Yeah, I'm just talking about a specific area, like the war on cancer.
But the oncogene stuff really came in the very early 70s and the late 60s. So it was a much more freewheeling environment than it's been for the past 20 years.
Yeah, very specific.
Very specific,
Right,
very
right.
translational.
Right, and it goes back to, I think we've kind of lost the sense of doing science for the science.
For the fun of it.
And I think that's what science is all about. We need to emphasize that more, and I think that's where the federal government can kind of come in and say, look, a lot of discoveries came from accidents, and my dissertation came from an accident. All of these things, they happen in everyday life, and that wouldn't be possible without federal support.
that you think that restriction enzymes, which allow us to do molecular biology, came out of research on mating strains of bacteria.
Yeah, I mean, it was just people doing big stuff.
Yeah.
Really, eventually.
Yeah, so that's why I was surprised when you said private industries are actually doing just basic science. What do they get out of it then?
Yeah.
But-
Yeah, let me find the article,
Yeah,
and then let
that'd
me
be
close the
interesting.
loop with you. I'll
Yeah,
make sure
that'd be
we-
great.
Yeah, okay.
That'd be great.
I have a friend, sorry, I thought this was funny. A friend of mine who researched theoretical mathematics before switching into time travel research, and he said that was actually more useful for society because they could use that for like design of, I don't even know, like planes and stuff. But just as.
All right, why don't we hear from our second speaker and then we'll open it back up for questions then.